Hi, everyone. I'm chatting with Sejal Amin today about what it takes to build and lead healthy teams. She's a creative, strategic thinker, and what I admire most about her is she has this intuitive, keen eye for what makes others strong and unique. She has a fantastic pulse on her team, and I cannot wait for her to share her tips and her best practices for leading healthy teams. Sejal, welcome.
Thank you, Joanna, for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
Can you share with me a time when you had to recalibrate a team? Maybe you were new to the team, or maybe the team members were new to one another.
There was a moment in time just a few months ago, not so long ago, where the team did feel misaligned and the degree of stress was heightened in the environment. That largely came from a vast amount of change, which was happening in the external environment. And what I saw as a result of that is that escalations were happening constantly, and the team's ability to problem solve was diminished. So as a leader, I found myself roaming into spaces which I wouldn't normally go. So what I did in that moment was to call a timeout with the team, be direct about what I saw was happening and why I thought it was happening, and ask them their perspectives on whether they observe the same things. The key here is, in order to have an effective reset, everyone first had to agree that we were in fact having a problem and that they saw the same challenge. Then we needed to get back on the straight and narrow again through a process of recognition, resetting our goals, and resetting expectations on what we were going to do differently. And a lot of that was around communication and just carving out a common agreement on how to move forward.
Tell me a little bit more about this idea of self-awareness. Each individual needs to be aware of their own strengths, gaps, and weaknesses, and the team as a whole needs to do the same. How do you help your people do that?
So first and foremost, Joanna, is by modeling it. The first is just being aware of how the emotions you have project to your people. And look, emotions, generally speaking, they're proven to be contagious, especially from leaders to their team. So only by being self-aware and socially aware can you learn to manage that. So when I got the team together, I immediately recognized what I had done to contribute to the situation. And the moment that I did that, people opened up about how they were feeling in the situation and recognized their own contributions to the environment. Beyond just practicing that self-awareness, actively listening, it becomes, so that's another practice. You can't really be attuned to the emotions of others if you're just waiting for your turn to speak. I think active listening conveys respect to the person that you're listening to. So an emotionally aware and intelligent leader is humble and confident enough to listen, even if they don't like what they're hearing, right? You have to listen and figure out what part of that criticism you're going to take and improve from. The last thing to point out is helping people shine. Powerful contentment can be found from giving credit to others when they've been successful. Even if you've been heavily involved in it, it doesn't matter. Rarely is it a feather in your hat to say, look what I did, versus, hey, look what they did. So giving credit to people and taking responsibility for your team's failures is a great quality of how you manage and lead a team and live by example.
Helping people shine. Love that phrase. What in your experience has helped you shine the light on your team members, help you praise and recognize them in a way that is meaningful to them?
So I'm going to give a long-winded answer to this.
Yes,
I want to start by making the point that for a team to really be a team, right? So rather than be a group of individuals, a team has to be aware of each other's wants, needs, and motivations. I've heard a saying recently that I'm going to repeat here, is that connection eats control for breakfast. And what does that really mean? It may feel odd to bring up relationships in the context of work and high-performing teams, but think about it. Work is a fundamentally social human activity. And at the core, that means it is relationship. It is relational. It's not necessarily about friendships, but work relationships are no less relational. The stuff of spreadsheets and figures is a healthy symptom of a really great team. Mm-hmm. So what leads to that? It's facilitating psychological safety, and it's something that I'm a big advocate of. I think it's the most important thing a leader can do. At every level in the organization, teams look around to find that safe place. And the true job of a leader is not command and control, which is what I started, but more about climate control. That climate is established from understanding your own core values, living those values, exemplifying them in everything you do every day. And therefore your team picks that up. Recognition is so important to it in that environment. And Google will tell you, by the way, you've seen Google's research on teams, right? Mm-hmm. There's no magic mix there of scale types, hierarchy, demographics, etc., etc. There's no one size fits all to make a team work. I think teams get to incredible outputs through through debate, by working together, by encouraging each other, but it comes through trust and respect. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to valuing people, to your point, I think it's really, really important to understand their unique attributes, their unique mm-hmm. abilities, and leverage those capabilities on a team. That's the best advice I have when building teams, is be aware of the individuals that you have and go after adding individuals to teams of different backgrounds and experience to round the team out. As you're getting to know individuals, you also get to understand what kind of recognition drives them and in what form it's best received, right? Recognition must be given to individuals and teams in the ways that they best receive it. Joanna, you were with us coaching our team, and if you remember, one of the things that they called out is that we didn't spend near enough time celebrating our team's successes. So that was one of the takeaways or the homework that you had given us. What we had done with that is we started a newsletter that celebrated good news, that team leaders had to provide input into the newsletter. It wasn't the leaders passing the input down. Rather, it was coming from the ground up, if you see what I mean. By the third iteration, the teams were so excited to see their names in writing that the letter got longer and longer with each iteration. And now, after 6 months, it was so successful in my space that it has been picked up and it's now being applied across the engineering organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that example, because I know that someone who's hearing us right now will pick up on that tidbit. I would love to hear, what are some of your best practices in fostering healthy communication within a team?
When building a team and elevating it to high performance, it's important, really, really important, to invest in shared goals, common understanding, and established ways of working. If your team doesn't have a mission or goal, I think they're not a team. They are individuals that are just working side by side. And if individuals have conflicting goals, they end up working against each other. And if they're working against each other, or even think they are, how can you can't expect them to trust each other, right? So trust goes out the window. Mission and goal sometimes are interchangeably used. So ideally, my recommendation is that you strive for both and you treat the two differently. Now, on the idea of common understanding, which again, this is something that you've helped us with this year, is how well does your team really know each other? And how well do they understand each other's strengths and weaknesses? Even if people have worked together for years, you'd likely be surprised with the answer. And in the context that you were operating with us, there were some people around the table who did know each other for years and still learned new things about each other, with a mix of several new people that didn't know anything about each other. And I think people assumed, interestingly enough, the newer people around the table assumed that the people that had the longer standing relationships knew everything about each other. And the reality was they did. I think it's important to understand each other's background, areas of expertise, interest, goals, any personal development goals they might be working on. because it helps them get connected. Like I said earlier, connection is important, and revealing yourself and all of these attributes just make you more approachable, human, and easier to connect with. And all of these things establish trust and respect. Those two things incredibly important. And now let's talk about ways of working. So what is that? These are established norms and behaviors that the team's going to follow to get things done. How and when do we share and communicate about our work? How do decisions get made? What behaviors are encouraged? How are we going to deal with conflict? Whether it be as a team or between each other, understanding how each individual shows up in a conflict and how they want to be approached in a conflict. I think differing work and communication styles can show up in different ways and can either help or hinder progress. So it's important to understand those dynamics, right? Because that then establishes some of the communication practices. The things that I've liked to do with my team is frequent communications. And what I mean by that is, we may have a standing meeting that's once a week, but I also like the frequent touch points throughout the week to communicate relevant information at that point in time. But even more importantly, frequent touch points for feedback. I think feedback, real-time feedback, is such a powerful tool that builds trust. So as a leader, when I see something, if I have the 5 minutes, I'll take the time to make that phone call, give the feedback real time, and engage in that dialogue very quickly. The idea of weekly and regular touch points is, just generally speaking, a good cadence. Having a way to communicate the mission statement and maybe keeping a storyboard or a canvas of sorts so that people are reminded of what the mission is, of what the objectives are, revisiting those on a regular basis and communicating about those things, whether it be in the form of metrics or other updates so that people have visibility on progress is incredibly important. Beyond that, it's not always about celebrating successes, but it's also about celebrating where things are going wrong, where we're learning things, where we might have had to change course because of what we learned.
Yeah, that's what I love about you, Sejal, that you talk about the principles and allow every team lead kind of adapt, right? And be authentic in what's most natural to them. Do you have a certain cadence to one-on-one meetings with your team members?
I like to do quick meetings with my direct team leaders. So quick means 30 minutes every week. Sometimes we end up canceling if we've had other touch points during the week. I think the other message I'm trying to get out there is that flexibility is key in this context. You might schedule things, but there's so many things that happen between point A and point B that requires you to, have to connect multiple times between point A and point B.
So communication and collaboration go hand in hand when it comes to high-performing teams. In your opinion, how does charging a team with a challenge foster collaboration?
Teams that are high-performing in the way that we've talked about, they will absolutely work through it, right? When you've given them something, teams get scrappy, they get creative, and ultimately, when they're challenged with a task or an outcome, they will figure out how to get there. And I think the important recipe is you tell them what you want the outcome to be and let them chart their way to it rather than a prescribed approach. So a few minutes ago, we talked about the difference between control and connection. A team that is connected, where you're giving them the tools and what goal you want them to achieve, they'll chart a path over trying to hand them what you want the outcome to be and give them a process to follow. I think in a high performing situation, that recipe is not going to work.
I like that a lot. Anytime, Sejal, you know this, anytime we get two people in the same room, there's a good chance there will be conflict. How do you help your people work through conflict in a way that's healthy and productive?
Protocol number one is to never step in. 9 times out of 10, it solves itself if you've created an environment where that kind of conflict is self-managed because because teams work together, right?
Yeah, it goes back to those initial stages of self-assessment, self-discovery, self-awareness,
Exactly.
and then teaming. That's really good.
Yeah.
Let me toss one more question your way, Sejal,
Sure.
and that is,
Sure.
what is one tip that you could offer to a leader who's just stepping into leading people?
Listening. I think listening is the most important thing. Generally speaking, as a new leader, you can't know what's going on with people if you're not listening and you're just waiting for your turn to speak. It's incredibly hard in this new mode that we're operating in because we're not talking in person with each other. So now it's your job as a leader to find different cues that are not just listening, but watching body language on camera. I think it conveys respect to the person that you're with. And as a leader, if you're also picking up other listening cues based on body language, based on how teams are behaving, based on how you see people communicating with each other, it elevates your performance as a leader. Remember that your job as a leader is not necessarily command and control, but it's climate control.
Climate control. I'm writing that phrase down. I love that.
Well, I heard it somewhere and I loved it, so I've stolen it. You can do the same. I think the idea, it's so catchy. I love the idea or the concept of a leader's role is climate control.
Sejal, thank you. I appreciate your insights. I know that they will be useful to all of those listening to us, and we'll continue to foster the conversation about healthy, high-performing teams. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joanna, again for having me here. I appreciate it.